Hey everyone! Today, we have a thrilling and unbelievable story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Betrayal, secrets, and a shocking truth. You won't believe what happens next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enjoy the story. A betrayal too deep. My husband's affair with our son's girlfriend. I never thought I'd be writing this. After 20 years of marriage, 2 children, and a life built on what I believed was trust, I found myself in the middle of a nightmare I can't wake up from. My name is Linda, 41F, and I've been a stay-at-home mom for most of my adult life. My husband, Richard, 48M, works in finance. Long hours, big deals, the kind of job that takes up more of his time than he ever had for me or our kids. Our son, Michael, 18M, is finishing high school and has been dating Emily, 18F, for years. She's practically been part of our family since they were freshmen. I thought she was like a daughter to me. I thought my husband was like a father figure to her. But last week, my world shattered. The message that changed everything. It happened so quickly. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I was just handing Richard his phone when a message popped up. A message from Emily. I miss you. I miss the way I feel when I'm with you. My heart stopped. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, maybe some innocent joke. But deep down I already knew. Something wasn't right. The next day, while Richard was in the shower, I went through his phone. I didn't even hesitate. And what I found, God, I wish I could unsee it. Emily, my son's girlfriend, the sweet girl who used to help me cook in the kitchen, who always called me Mom as a joke, who I thought would marry my son one day. She and my husband had been seeing each other. The messages were disgusting. He compared me to her, calling me old, boring, used up, and she laughed. They talked about things I won't repeat here. But worst of all, they spoke about Michael. He'll never know, Emily had written. Even if he finds out, it's not like he could ever be the man you are. Richard responded with a heart emoji. I felt like throwing up. How long had this been going on? I started going back in my mind. Had it been a year? 2? Had he been waiting for her to turn 18? I searched his computer, and what I found there made it even worse. Hundreds of pictures of her. Some from her social media, some from times she had been in our home. None of them explicit, but enough to know he had been watching her for a long, long time. And then there were the dating apps. Richard had profiles on multiple sites, all set to match with young women between 18 and 22. He was actively looking for girls who could be his daughter. The more I dug, the sicker I felt. The signs I ignored. I started remembering things I'd brushed off. The lingerie I found in our bedroom that wasn't mine. I convinced myself it could have been something misplaced. The way Richard started complimenting Emily more. Her hair, her smile, her maturity. The extra attention he gave her when she was over. The way she started acting differently around me. Less friendly, more distant. Like she knew she had something over me. I even found an old text from months ago where Richard had sent her a message that read, I can't wait until I can finally touch you. Until. Had he been waiting for her to turn 18? Had this been going on before then? The ultimate betrayal. I couldn't stay silent. I called my brother, who got me in touch with a divorce lawyer immediately. I needed proof and I needed to be smart. But the hardest part was Michael. How do I tell my son that the girl he loves, the girl he trusts, the girl he imagined a future with has been sleeping with his father? How do I tell him that the man he looks up to is a predator? And then there's Emily's mother. Does she know? Would she believe me if I told her? The worst part? Emily doesn't think she did anything wrong. When I confronted her, she smirked. I love him, she said. You're just bitter because he doesn't love you anymore. I have never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. What comes next? My lawyer is gathering evidence. I'm staying at my brother's house with my kids. Richard is calling me, leaving voicemails. Angry, defensive, trying to convince me it's not what it looks like. But I have proof. Emily is still delusional. She thinks Richard is going to leave me for her, that they'll be together, that they have some kind of special love. I know the truth. I know that once she realizes she was just another young girl to him, she'll break. And I almost feel bad for her. Almost. But right now I have to think about my kids. About Michael, who still doesn't know the truth. How do I tell him? How do I break my son's heart? I don't have an answer yet. But I know one thing. I'm not going to let Richard get away with this. The weight of the truth. I hadn't slept. Not really. My brother's guest room felt suffocating. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw their messages. Their laughter. The way my husband, the man I spent 2 decades with, reduced me to nothing more than a bitter, aging wife while his hands, and his heart, belonged to my son's girlfriend. How was I supposed to wake up the next morning and tell my son that the girl he adored, the one he had been planning his future around, was in love with his father? I wasn't ready, but I didn't have a choice. Michael deserves the truth. By the time the sun came up, I had made my decision. Michael and Mary deserved to know. They weren't children anymore, and no matter how much I wanted to protect them from this, they were already in the middle of it. I sat at the kitchen table, gripping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My brother hovered nearby, giving me space, but his presence alone kept me grounded. I could feel my son's eyes on me as he entered the room. "Mom, what's going on?" He knew something was wrong. He'd known from the moment I picked him up from school the day before. My face had been too tight, my voice too soft, my hands too shaky, but I had forced myself to hold it together. I pulled out the chair beside me and patted it. "Sit down." Michael hesitated. His blue eyes flickered between mine, searching, questioning. Then he sat. Mary was still asleep upstairs. Maybe it was for the best. She deserved to hear this in a more controlled setting, not while her brother was unraveling in front of her. I inhaled deeply. This was it. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, forcing my voice to remain steady. "And I need you to listen carefully." Michael's expression darkened. "Okay." I glanced at my brother, who gave me a reassuring nod, then turned back to my son. "I found out that your father is having an affair." Michael stiffened, his entire body going rigid. His fingers curled into fists on the table. "What?" I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. "He's been seeing someone else. For a while now." Michael's breathing quickened. "Who?" I hesitated. My stomach churned. "How do you tell your son that his father has been sleeping with his girlfriend?" His patience snapped. "Who, Mom?" I opened my mouth, but before I could say it, he already knew. His face drained of color. "No!" Tears welled in his eyes before he even had the strength to fight them. "Michael, I'm so sorry." "No. No, that's not." He shot up from his chair, knocking it over in the process. "You're lying." My heart clenched. "I wish I was." His entire body trembled as he backed away from me, running a hand through his messy hair. "No, Amy wouldn't. I have proof." He froze. Those words crushed something inside of him. I stood up slowly, moving toward the kitchen counter where I had hidden my phone. I didn't want to show him. God, I didn't. But if I didn't, he would never believe me. He would convince himself this was some kind of mistake, that his father could never betray him like this. I unlocked my phone and opened the screenshots. I didn't even have to press play. The first image said it all. His father's name, Amy's name, their words, their laughter. I turned the screen toward him. Michael's lips parted, his breath shuddering. His trembling fingers reached for the phone but hovered just above it. I saw the moment his heart broke. His hand shot up to his mouth, his body rocking slightly as his chest caved inward. He sucked in a sharp breath, then another. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. Then, suddenly, he turned and bolted out the door. Michael's rage. I was moving before I even realized it, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement as I chased after him. "Michael, wait!" He didn't. He ran down the driveway, across the street, and into the yard. He was heading for the car. "Michael, stop!" I screamed. He yanked the driver's side door open. My brother was behind me now, sprinting toward us. "Michael, don't do this," my brother warned. Michael's face was twisted in something beyond heartbreak, beyond rage. "I have to see him," he hissed. "I have to hear him say it." My heart pounded. I reached out, gripping his wrist. Michael, please. You can't go there right now. You are not in the right headspace. He ripped his arm away from me. I need to hear it from him. I need to know if he's a goddamn coward or if he'll actually look me in the face and admit it. I was crying now. I didn't even realize when the tears had started falling. My hands were shaking. Please, I whispered. Michael stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Then his entire body sagged. He looked utterly destroyed. For the first time in years, I saw my baby boy. He wasn't an 18-year-old young man. He was a heartbroken child who had just lost everything. He staggered backward, gripping the car door for support, then let out a gut-wrenching scream. It was raw and full of agony, echoing through the quiet street. Then he collapsed onto the pavement. My brother and I rushed to him, falling to our knees. I wrapped my arms around him, and he didn't fight me. He sobbed. Deep, shaking sobs that racked his entire body. His voice was muffled against my shoulder. I hate him, he choked out. I hate him so much. I squeezed my eyes shut. I know, sweetheart. I know. And the worst part? So did I. The next move. Took an hour to calm him down. My brother sat with us on the curb, saying nothing, just being there. When Michael finally spoke again, his voice was hoarse. I don't want to see her, he muttered. I don't want to see him. I nodded. You don't have to. He wiped his face, looking at me through red-rimmed eyes. What now? I exhaled. Now, we make sure your father never gets the chance to hurt us again. Michael's jaw clenched. He swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. I pulled him close again. We'll get through this. And as I held my son, listening to his broken breathing, I knew this was just the beginning. A Family Shattered Part 3. Michael barely spoke for the rest of the day. He stayed curled up in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, lost in his own mind. I checked on him every few hours, offering food, tea, water, anything to keep him grounded, but he didn't take anything. By nightfall, Mary knew something was wrong. She kept pacing the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Mom, what's going on? I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark for much longer. She was too smart for that. I guided her to the couch and took her hands in mine. Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you, and it's going to hurt. Her wide, blue eyes locked onto mine. Is this about Dad? A lump formed in my throat. Yes. She exhaled sharply, bracing herself. What did he do this time? I flinched at those words. She had always known he was selfish, emotionally distant, and arrogant. But she had no idea just how deep his betrayal ran. I squeezed her hands. Your father is having an affair. Mary's whole body stiffened. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I swallowed the bile in my throat and forced myself to continue. And it's not just an affair, Mary. It's with... My voice cracked. I had to force myself to say it. It's with Amy. First, she didn't react. She just sat there, blinking, as if the words hadn't fully registered. Then she yanked her hands away from mine and burst out laughing. A hollow, bitter laugh. Oh, that's a good one, Mom, she scoffed. Seriously, though, what did he do? My chest ached. I'm not joking, sweetheart. Her laughter stopped immediately. The color drained from her face, and her fingers curled into fists. I reached for my phone and pulled up the evidence. I wish I were lying, I whispered, holding the screen out to her. She didn't even hesitate. She snatched the phone from my hands, her eyes scanning the text messages, the call logs, the screenshots of their conversations. Her entire body started to shake. Mary! She flung the phone across the room, crashed against the wall and slid to the floor, the screen still glowing. That's disgusting, she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He's disgusting. I nodded, my own throat tight with emotion. I know, baby. I know. Her shoulders heaved as she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Michael? Does he know? I nodded again. I told him this morning. Her eyes flashed. Where is he? In his room. He didn't take it well. Mary shot up from the couch. I need to see him. Before I could stop her, she was already storming down the hallway. The moment everything changed. She didn't bother knocking. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Michael was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. He didn't even turn his head when Mary entered. She stood there for a long moment, just watching him. Then, in a voice so small and broken, she whispered, "It's true, isn't it?" Michael's jaw clenched. He closed his eyes. Then he nodded. Mary let out a shuddering breath. And then she screamed. It wasn't just any scream. It was a raw, agonized, soul-crushing scream. The kind of scream that could break windows. The kind of scream that could shatter hearts. She collapsed onto the floor, her hands digging into her scalp as she let out another choked sob. "I hate him," she whispered. "I hate him so much." Michael finally moved. For the first time all day, he sat up and reached for his sister, pulling her into his arms. And together they cried. I stood frozen in the doorway, my own tears falling freely. My children, the two people I loved most in this world, were completely and utterly broken. And it was his fault. The call. It was nearly midnight when I made my decision. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air wrapping around me like a blanket. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts. Then I pressed call. It rang twice before he answered. His voice was low, wary. "Hello." I took a deep breath. "Richard." Silence. Then, "Anna." I clenched my jaw. "We need to talk." More silence. Then a slow, deliberate exhale. I figured this was coming. I gritted my teeth. "You have no idea what's coming." He chuckled darkly. "So what now? You want to scream at me? Call me every name in the book? Go ahead. Get it out of your system." I tightened my grip on the phone. "You don't get to act like the victim here." His laughter stopped. "You destroyed our family," I continued, my voice shaking with fury. "You humiliated me. You betrayed your son. You took everything good in our lives and burned it to the ground." Another long pause. Then he said, "You don't understand, Anna." I scoffed. "Oh, trust me. I understand perfectly." "No, you don't," he snapped. "Amy, she's—" I cut him off. "Do not try to justify this." Silence. "You will never see them again," I whispered, my voice cold. "Not Michael. Not Mary. You lost that right the moment you touched her." A long pause. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, he muttered, "She loves me, you know." I almost dropped the phone. A deep, guttural rage boiled inside me. "You're sick," I whispered. "You're a predator." He exhaled sharply. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? Then what is it, Richard? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." He didn't answer. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "I don't care what you have to say. I don't care what excuse you want to give me. This is over. Do you hear me? Over." I was about to hang up when his voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Be careful, Anna." My blood ran cold. I gripped the phone tighter. Was that a threat? A beat of silence. Then he chuckled. "Just saying, things aren't always as simple as they seem." And then he hung up. I stood there, my heart pounding, my fingers white-knuckling the phone. A slow, creeping dread crawled up my spine. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. A Family Shattered Part 4. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, my phone lying in front of me like a loaded gun. My mind replayed Richard's words over and over again. "Be careful, Anna." It wasn't just a passing remark. It was a warning, or worse, a threat. I wasn't naive. Richard had always been controlling, always had a way of twisting things to make himself the victim, always knew how to manipulate people into seeing things from his perspective. But this was different. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about Michael, about Mary. And if I was right, if Richard had been grooming Amy for years, then who was to say she was the only one? A sickening realization settled in my gut. I needed to dig deeper. The hidden files. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I waited until Michael and Mary had left the house. Michael to clear his head, Mary to spend time with a friend. Neither of them wanted to talk about their father. I didn't blame them. When I was alone, I grabbed my laptop and started searching. I had already found the messages, the dating apps, the secret folders, but I hadn't looked deep enough. I went back into his email. For years, I had ignored Richard's growing obsession with secrecy. He had multiple accounts, one for work, one for personal use, and at least 2 others I had stumbled across by accident. He was always careful, always deleting his browsing history, always making sure his phone was locked with a passcode I never knew. But I was smarter than he thought. I clicked into one of his lesser-used accounts, the one I had access to from when we still shared bills and passwords. It took less than 2 minutes to find something horrifying. A folder labeled Interests. I hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, I opened it. The truth I never wanted to know. Inside were hundreds of saved images. Some were innocent, pictures of actresses, fitness models, women he had probably followed online. But the further I scrolled, the worse it got. Screenshots from private social media accounts. Photos of young girls. Not explicit, thank God, but disturbing. Photos taken at parks, at malls, at school events. Candids. My stomach dropped. These weren't random images pulled from the internet. These were pictures he had taken himself. Girls who had no idea they were being watched. No idea they were being saved to a folder on his computer. My breath came in shallow gasps as I kept scrolling, kept uncovering more. And then I saw her, Amy. Dozens of pictures of her. Some from her Instagram, others taken without her knowing. Some from when she was 16. Tears blurred my vision as I slammed the laptop shut. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled to the sink, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just about my family. Richard was dangerous. And he had been doing this for a long, long time. The plan. I couldn't sit on this information. Not now. Not when I knew what he was capable of. I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person I could trust right now. My brother, Mark. He answered on the second ring. Anna? What's wrong? I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Anna, he repeated, his voice sharper now. Talk to me. I swallowed hard. I found something. What do you mean? I squeezed my eyes shut. I need you to come over. Now. The reckoning. Mark arrived 20 minutes later. I barely spoke as I led him to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and showed him the files. He scrolled in silence, his jaw tightening with every image. When he finally looked up, his face was pale with rage. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. We need to go to the police. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was terrified of what would happen next. How far had Richard's influence reached? Had he hurt anyone? Had he groomed others? Had he, God forbid, done worse? Mark saw the hesitation on my face and placed a hand on mine. You're scared, he said. I get it. But if we don't report this, if we don't do something, who knows how many other girls he'll go after? A cold shiver ran down my spine. I nodded. Okay. And with that, we gathered everything. The screenshots, the emails, the hidden folders, and we drove to the police station. The aftermath. Hours later, I sat in a small interrogation room, a detective sitting across from me. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and serious, asking questions I never thought I'd have to answer. When did you first suspect your husband was engaging in inappropriate behavior with minors? I swallowed. I didn't. Not at first. I thought he was just having an affair. I didn't realize the full extent of it until today. She scribbled something in her notebook. And the girl, Amy, does she know you're here? I hesitated. No, I admitted. She still thinks he loves her. The detective sighed. That's common in these cases. I clenched my fists in my lap. What happens now? She closed her notebook and looked me in the eye. We investigate. We bring him in for questioning. But if what you've shown us is legitimate, and I have no reason to doubt that, he won't be walking free for much longer. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived, because just as I was about to thank her, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message. From an unknown number. My blood ran cold as I read the words. You shouldn't have done that, Anna. My breath hitched. Mark leaned over to read it, his face darkening. That son of a bitch. The detective saw our reaction. What is it? I turned the screen toward her, my hands shaking. She read the message, then looked up at me. Her expression was unreadable. We need to move fast. I nodded, my heart pounding. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized that Richard wasn't done with me yet. A Family Shattered Part 5. The clock is ticking. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. My phone still sat on the table, the ominous text glaring at me like a warning sign in the dark. You shouldn't have done that, Anna. My fingers tightened around the edges of the chair as I looked up at the detective. Her expression was unreadable, but I could sense the shift in the air. Something had changed. Mark, sitting beside me, let out a long breath through his nose. His fists clenched on the table. This means he knows, he muttered. He knows she went to the cops. The detective, Officer Blake, nodded slowly. That's possible. Or he's trying to intimidate you into backing down. I shook my head. He knows. Richard wouldn't waste his time sending empty threats. If he's contacting me, he's already thinking about his next move. Blake studied me for a moment. How dangerous is he? The question sent a chill down my spine. How dangerous was Richard? Before this, I would have said he was controlling, manipulative, maybe even emotionally abusive. But dangerous? No. But now, I had found pictures, messages, secrets buried so deep he was willing to risk it all to keep them hidden. I thought about Amy, about the other young girls in his folders. I swallowed. I don't know what he's capable of anymore. Blake nodded. Then we take precautions. You need to leave the house. She stood, gathering her notes, her face unreadable. Anna, we're going to take this threat seriously. That means you and your children need to leave your house for the time being. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Leave, I echoed. Where am I supposed to go? Mark didn't hesitate. You're coming with me. Blake nodded approvingly. Good. You shouldn't be alone. We're going to put in an emergency request for a restraining order. But until we have Richard in custody, we don't know what he might do. I swallowed hard. What if he comes after us? Blake's jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready. The room felt smaller. My world was closing in, and no matter how much I tried to stay calm, I could feel the panic creeping up my spine. Was this really happening? Packing up a life in shadows. By the time we left the station, the sun was beginning to set. The drive back to my house felt like moving through a dream. My mind buzzing with a million thoughts, but none of them clear. When we pulled into the driveway, I hesitated. The house looked different. The lights were still off, the curtains still drawn. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt wrong. Mark turned to me. We'll be quick. Grab only the essentials. We're not staying longer than we have to. I nodded, but my hands were already shaking. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside was still, almost too still. I knew Richard wasn't here. His car was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Mark noticed. I'll check the rooms. I nodded and moved toward the stairs, heading to my bedroom. I didn't pack much. Just a few bags with clothes for me and the kids, important documents, and my laptop. I hesitated when I reached my nightstand, my fingers hovering over a framed picture of our family from years ago. Back when we were happy, before I knew the truth. I turned the frame over and shoved it into the bag. Downstairs, Mark reappeared, his face tense. Nobody's here, but he held up something small. A hidden camera. My stomach lurched. Where was that? In the living room, he said grimly. I checked the vents and the light fixtures. This was tucked near the bookshelf. And if there's one, There could be more, I whispered. The walls felt like they were closing in. Mark exhaled sharply. We need to go. Now. I didn't argue. We grabbed everything and walked out the door, leaving behind more than just a house. We were leaving behind the last remnants of the life I thought I had. Mary knows something's wrong. By the time we reached Mark's house, the exhaustion was hitting me full force. Mary and Michael were waiting inside, their eyes searching mine as I walked through the door. Michael was the first to speak. What's going on? I forced a smile. We're just staying here for a little while, just until things settle down. He didn't question it. Not yet. But Mary? She narrowed her eyes. Mom, don't lie. I froze. I hadn't even realized I was crying. Mark stepped in. It's complicated, kiddo. But you're safe here. Okay? Mary's jaw clenched. This is about Dad. Isn't it? I inhaled sharply. Mary. She didn't let me finish. He did something else, didn't he? Her voice wavered. She wasn't just angry. She was scared. I hesitated. She wasn't a child anymore. She deserved to know. Sweetheart, I said softly. There are things happening right now that I can't fully explain, but I promise you, we're going to be okay. She stared at me for a long time, then slowly nodded. Okay. I knew she didn't believe me, and the worst part? I wasn't sure I believed it either. Richard is one step ahead. It wasn't until later that night, when the house was quiet and my mind was still racing, that my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, the message was shorter. But somehow it was even worse. You think you've won, Anna? You have no idea what you've started. My breath caught in my throat. Mark, sitting across the room, noticed immediately. What is it? I showed him the screen. His expression hardened. That son of a... Before he could finish, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. From Richard. With a video attachment. I hesitated before clicking it. My stomach churned. The video was grainy, shaky, taken from what looked like a hidden camera. And then I saw it. I saw me. I was in the kitchen, talking to Mark. The footage was from earlier today. From inside the house. Richard had been watching us. My pulse pounded in my ears. Mark grabbed my phone. That's it. We're getting the cops involved again. Right now. I nodded numbly, because this wasn't just a divorce anymore. This wasn't just a broken marriage. This was a war. And somehow Richard was always one step ahead. A Family Shattered Part 6. The video changed everything. Mark paced the length of the room, his jaw tight with frustration as I sat frozen, staring at the grainy video on my phone screen. He's been watching us. The realization was like ice in my veins. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been recorded just hours ago. The footage was from inside Mark's house, a conversation we'd had right here in this very room. I swallowed hard. How the hell did he get this? Mark shook his head. I don't know. But if he has cameras here... My eyes darted around the room, paranoia sinking in. Was he still watching? Mark stopped pacing and grabbed his phone. I'm calling the police. I barely heard him. My hands trembled as I replayed the video, my mind racing. Richard had always been controlling, tracking my movements, questioning where I was. But this was something else. This was obsession. Mary's realization. I didn't notice Mary standing in the hallway until she spoke. He was watching us? I turned sharply, quickly locking my phone. Mary, go back to your room. She folded her arms. No. I heard everything. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Sweetheart, this isn't something you need to worry about. Her face hardened. Mom, stop treating me like a kid. I'm not stupid. I hesitated. She deserved the truth. But how much? Mark hung up his phone and looked at me. Police are on their way. Then, noticing Mary, he softened his tone. Hey kiddo, we'll handle this. You don't have to worry. Mary scoffed. How can I not worry? My dad is spying on us. What if he... She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. I stood quickly. Mary. She didn't respond, just stared at me with wide eyes. Then she whispered. He knows we left. A cold chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She bit her lip, hesitating. Then, barely audible, she said, "Before we left the house, I found something in my room." Mark and I exchanged glances. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mary took a shaky breath. "A note. In my desk drawer." The room felt too quiet. Mark was the first to break the silence. "Mary, where's the note?" She pulled her phone from her hoodie pocket and tapped the screen. I took a picture of it. She turned the phone toward us, and my stomach dropped. It was a handwritten note. One line. "Leaving me so soon? You know that's not how this works." No name. No signature. But we knew. We were running out of time. Mark clenched his fists. "That sick bastard." My breathing was shallow. "Mary, when did you find this?" She swallowed. "Right before we left. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to freak you out." Mark ran a hand through his hair. He was already in the house before we even left. He knew she'd find it. A knock at the door made all three of us jump. Mark quickly checked the security camera feed. "It's the police." I exhaled, but my pulse didn't slow down. Mark let them in, and within minutes the living room was filled with uniformed officers. One of them, Detective Carter, stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We need to talk." Richard's next move. Detective Carter listened as we explained everything, the threats, the video, the hidden cameras. He took a deep breath before speaking. "You were right to come forward. This isn't just a domestic dispute anymore." I shivered. "Then what is it?" Carter's jaw tightened. "This is stalking, harassment, and possible illegal surveillance." My throat went dry. "He's escalating," Carter continued. "The fact that he's watching you even now means he's not just angry, he's obsessed. And obsessed men are unpredictable." I felt lightheaded. "What do we do?" Carter didn't hesitate. "We need to find him before he does something worse. A desperate escape." The officers swept through Mark's house, checking for any planted cameras or listening devices. They found 3. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in my bedroom. Mark turned pale when he saw it. "That bastard was watching you sleep." I gripped the edge of the counter, trying not to collapse. Carter turned to me. "Pack a bag. You're leaving tonight." I looked up at him. "Where?" He sighed. "Somewhere safe. We can put you in a temporary shelter while we track him down." I shook my head. "No, I'm not hiding." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You don't have a choice. He's watching you." Mark stepped forward. "I'll take her somewhere he can't find us." Carter hesitated. "You're sure?" Mark nodded. "I won't let anything happen to them." Carter exhaled. "Fine, but we need to move fast." The final message. As I packed, my phone buzzed again. A text. This time there was no video, no threat, just one sentence. "You can run, but you can't hide." I stared at the words, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. Mark saw my face. "What is it?" I handed him my phone. He read the message, his jaw tightening. "Let's go," he said. "Now." We left that night, not knowing where Richard was, not knowing what he was planning next, but knowing one thing for sure: this wasn't over. A Family Shattered Part 7. The Escape. We drove through the night, the roads stretching endlessly ahead, swallowed in the pitch-black darkness. Mark kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting tensely on the gear shift, his knuckles white. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping Mary's hand in the back seat, both of us silent. None of us spoke. We were running, but from what? Richard was out there, watching, waiting, planning. Detective Carter had given us strict instructions. No phones, no credit cards, no social media. Richard had tracked us before. We weren't about to make it easy for him now. Mark's cabin was 3 hours north, nestled deep in the woods, far from the world. No neighbors, no cameras, just isolation. Exactly what we needed. At least that's what I told myself. Something felt off. By the time we reached the dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was beginning to rise. The trees loomed tall on either side, casting long, eerie shadows across the gravel path. Mark killed the engine. "We'll be safe here," he said, turning to me. I nodded, but my stomach twisted. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe again. Mary climbed out first, stretching her arms, yawning. I forced a tired smile at her. "Why don't you go inside and get some rest?" She nodded and trudged toward the porch. Mark grabbed our bags from the trunk. "We'll stay here for a few days, let things cool down." I followed him up the steps, my body aching from exhaustion. Mark unlocked the door, stepping inside first. The air smelled like wood and old books. The place had been untouched for months. I set my bag down by the couch and exhaled. Maybe, just maybe, we could breathe for a while. And then, Mary screamed. The cabin wasn't empty. Mark's gun was out before I even processed the sound. He bolted toward Mary's room. My body went numb as I ran after him, my heart in my throat. Mary stood frozen in the doorway. "Mary!" I whispered, stepping closer. She didn't answer. She just pointed. Mark stepped inside first, his gun raised, scanning the room. I peered over his shoulder. There was a note on the bed. A single sheet of paper, neatly folded. My hands shook as I reached for it. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Bile rose in my throat. Mark grabbed the paper, flipping it over. No signature. No sign of how it got there. "Did you lock the door?" he asked. I blinked at him. "What? When we got here. Did you lock the damn door?" I shook my head. I don't know. I thought." Mark swore under his breath. He stormed toward the front of the cabin, checking every window, every door, testing the locks. Everything was sealed shut. "No one came in through the doors," he muttered. "Windows are all locked. The place was empty when I checked it last month." I swallowed hard. "Then how?" Mark didn't answer, but we both knew. He had been here first. That note wasn't left tonight. It had been here before we arrived. Richard had planned this. Mary backed up against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. "I want to leave." I pulled her into a tight hug, forcing my own panic down. "We're okay," I whispered, lying to both of us. Mark was already on his phone, dialing Carter. "I need an officer out here. Now." My heart pounded as I stared at the note again. My name wasn't on it. There was nothing specific about where we had run. But it was enough to send a clear message. He knew we'd come here, and that meant he was still watching. The blood on the porch. The knock on the door made me jump. Mark moved fast, gun in hand. But when he yanked the door open, a uniformed officer stood outside, hand resting cautiously on his holster. Carter had sent him. Officer Jennings, according to his badge. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Detective Carter told me to secure the area. Mark handed him the note. This was inside when we got here. Jennings read it, his expression darkening. "Any sign of forced entry?" "No." Jennings nodded, moving past us to check the house himself. Mark turned back to me. "Take Mary to the bedroom. Lock the door." I hesitated. "But what if?" "Now, Anna." I didn't argue. I grabbed Mary's wrist and led her down the hall. She didn't protest, but her hands were clammy in mine. The bedroom was small, just a bed and a dresser. I locked the door and pulled her down onto the mattress beside me. We sat in silence, listening, for anything. Footsteps creaked outside in the main room. Mark and Jennings talking in hushed tones. And then a sound from outside, a sharp thud, like something had been dropped on the porch. Mark's voice was a low growl. "What the hell is that?" Jennings unholstered his weapon. "Stay inside. I'll check it out." The door creaked open. Silence. Then a curse. Mark ran out after him. I grabbed Mary's hand and followed, heart pounding. Jennings was standing at the edge of the porch, gun drawn. There was something on the wooden steps. Something dark. I stepped closer, my stomach twisting. It was a dead animal. A rabbit. His throat slit. Blood pooled beneath it, soaking into the porch. But it wasn't the blood that made me stumble back. It was what was stuffed in its mouth. A folded piece of paper. Jennings crouched down, using the tip of his glove to pull it free. He unfolded it, his face unreadable. Then slowly he turned to me and read the words aloud. "I told you, Anna. You can run, but you can't hide." A Family Shattered, Part 8. The warning. Jennings scanned the tree line, his hand tightening on his gun. Mark stood beside him, his jaw clenched, eyes darting between the note and the blood pooling beneath the dead rabbit. Couldn't breathe. My stomach twisted. Richard was here, or he had been. The realization sent ice through my veins. He wasn't just watching from a distance anymore, he was toying with us. "Get inside," Mark ordered, his voice sharp. "Now." I grabbed Mary's hand, but she wouldn't move. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "Mom," she whispered. "He knows where we are." I forced myself to swallow the fear climbing my throat. "We're not alone," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Jennings is here. Carter knows. We're safe." I didn't believe my own words. Jennings knelt beside the rabbit, poking at the note with the tip of his glove. "It's fresh," he muttered. "Blood's still warm." I felt sick. That means Richard was here just minutes ago. I turned, scanning the darkened forest surrounding the cabin. Every shadow, every shifting tree branch made my skin crawl. Was he out there now, watching us? Laughing? Jennings stood, his expression grim. "Detective Carter is sending a unit. Until then, no one leaves this house. Lock the doors. Keep the lights off." Mark nodded sharply and ushered me and Mary inside. The second the door shut, he bolted it, pulling the blinds closed. I exhaled shakily. How had he known? How did Richard find us so fast? The surveillance. Mark paced the room, restless. He had to have followed us. Jennings stood by the window, peering out. "Doubt it. I was watching for tails." Mark shook his head. "Then how?" Jennings didn't answer. Because he didn't have to. We all knew. Richard was smarter than us. I sat down on the couch, my knees weak. My mind was racing through every possibility, every worst-case scenario. The note, the rabbit, the precision of it all. He hadn't broken in, he'd left it outside. Right where we'd find it. Where he knew we'd see it. Mary sat beside me, hugging herself. "I hate this," she whispered. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "I know, baby. I know." Jennings checked the locks again before pulling out his radio. "Unit 42. Status?" "Static." Then a response. "ETA 20 minutes. Jennings exhaled through his nose. "They're coming. We just have to sit tight." But I wasn't sure if we had 20 minutes. The footsteps. The house was silent. Every second felt stretched, agonizing. Mark had his gun loaded, resting on the coffee table. Jennings stood near the door, eyes sharp. Mary kept close to me, her hands shaking. Then a sound. A soft crunch outside. I stiffened. Jennings lifted a hand, motioning for silence. Mark reached for his gun. We waited. The sound came again. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something heavier. Deliberate. I swallowed hard. Mary's fingers dug into my arm. Jennings moved first, stepping toward the window. Careful. Slow. He peered out through the gap in the blinds. I held my breath. A long pause. Then Jennings turned to us. His expression was tight, controlled, but his voice gave him away. "He's here. The man in the woods." My pulse thundered in my ears. Jennings pointed toward the farthest tree line. I saw movement. Couldn't make out details, but someone's there. Mark exhaled sharply, checking his gun. "What do we do?" Jennings reached for his radio. "Unit 42, we have eyes on a suspect. Requesting immediate backup." "Over." "Static." "Then copy that. Hold position." "Hold position." That meant stay put. Do nothing. Wait. I clenched my fists. That's exactly what Richard wanted. Jennings turned back toward the window, eyes scanning the darkness. "We're not engaging unless he forces our hand." I felt Mary shaking beside me. "I don't want to wait," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "I know, honey." Jennings motioned for Mark to kill the lights. Darkness swallowed the cabin. For a few moments, nothing. Just silence. My own breath. Then, a sharp tap against the window. Jennings spun, gun raised. Another tap. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Mark moved to the side, staying in the shadows. Tap, tap, tap. I reached for Mary, pulling her close. Jennings shifted, angling his gun toward the window. Tap, tap. Silence. Then the whisper. Right outside. Anna. I felt my stomach drop. Richard. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. The voice came again, a sickening drawl. You can't hide from me. Mark snapped. He lunged forward, flinging the blinds open. The darkness outside swallowed the porch, but no one was there. Jennings cursed, moving toward the door. Get back, he hissed. Mark didn't move. I could see it in his eyes. The fury, the fear, the helplessness. Tap. This time from the other window. Jennings turned fast, aiming. But again, nothing. He was playing with us. A sound buzzed to life. My phone. A text. I dug it out with shaking hands. No caller ID. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I opened it. A photo. I gasped. My vision blurred. It was us, taken from outside the cabin. A shot of me, Mary, and Mark sitting together just minutes ago. The timestamp was now. I dropped the phone. He's watching us, I whispered. Jennings moved fast. We need to move. Now. Where? I asked, my voice barely holding. He knows everywhere we've gone. A loud crash. The back door. Mark grabbed me, shoving Mary behind him. Jennings spun. Stay here. He bolted toward the back. My breath hitched. The door was locked. The house was secure. But another crash. Then, footsteps inside the house. I choked back a sob. Richard was in the house. A family-shattered final part. The breaking point. The footsteps echoed through the cabin. Deliberate. Measured. Jennings gripped his gun, moving fast toward the back door. Mark shoved Mary and me behind the couch, his breathing heavy. My pulse roared in my ears. Richard was inside. Jennings reached the hallway, his silhouette blending into the darkness. Silence stretched. My fingers dug into the fabric of Mary's shirt, holding her close. Then a sharp creak. A shadow moved in the doorway. Richard. My breath hitched. His face was barely visible in the dim glow of the moonlight. But I saw enough. The twisted grin. The gleam in his eyes. He took a step forward. Anna, he whispered, his voice almost gentle. Why are you running? Mark lifted his gun. Don't move. Richard chuckled. Unfazed. Jennings' voice rang out from the hallway. Hands up now. Richard turned just slightly. You all act like I'm some kind of monster. He exhaled, shaking his head. Anna, you know me better than that. I felt my stomach churn. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I never knew you at all. His expression darkened. The mask slipped for just a second. Then chaos. Jennings lunged. A gunshot rang through the cabin. Mary screamed. Mark tackled me to the ground as Richard's body hit the floor. Jennings stood over him, gun smoking. For a second, no one moved. Then, Richard groaned, clutching his shoulder. Alive. Jennings kicked the gun away from him, shoving a knee into his back. It's over, he said, voice cold. You're done. The aftermath. Red and blue lights flashed against the trees. Officers swarmed the cabin, securing Richard in cuffs. Mary sobbed into my arms. Mark was shaking, his grip firm around my shoulders. Jennings spoke to the officers, his expression unreadable. I exhaled shakily. It was over. Richard was caught. We were safe. But as they loaded him into the back of a police cruiser, he turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine, and he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. I shuddered, because deep down I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was a game to him, and even though he lost, he had loved every second of it. Thank you for watching. What would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more gripping stories.